Welcome to Illuminati Silver. We tell you the truth about silver. Today is Friday the 27th of September 2019 and we're producing two videos today. This one relates to a Brexit update where we interview controversially Greg, and the second, which will be published in a few hours' time, which relates to the dramatic slowdown in the growth of the Chinese economy and what that means for the rest of the world and gold and silver prices. So please watch out for that one. Anyway, yesterday saw some robust scenes in the UK Parliament, and Greg will give us an update as to what happened and also the background to the Supreme Court's decision to cancel the Prorogation of Parliament against the government's wishes. So let's investigate. Greg, welcome.
Good morning.
So, Greg, we've had an interesting week in the United Kingdom with the UK Parliament being recalled from prorogation after the result of a Supreme Court judgment against the government handed down on Tuesday of this week. So please tell us where we are in relation to Brexit as a result of this ruling.
Basically, I'd firstly like to remind those listening to us of the old Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times. They are indeed interesting at the moment. The so-called Supreme Court had been called on to interfere in the politics of Britain very much against the wishes of the British people, in that a promise was given to the British people that they would have their referendum of 2016 honoured by their politicians. Parliament went on to an election in which both of the main parties, the Conservative Party and the Socialist Labour Party, included in their manifestos that they would honour the original undertaking and enact withdrawal from the European Union as voted on in the largest vote in British history. 17.4 million voters voted for leaving the European Union. They voted on a binary question: do you wish to remain in the European Union, or do you wish to leave the European Union? There were no ifs, no buts. There were no conditions placed on it. Did we wish to remain, or did we wish to leave? 52% of the electorate voted to leave. 48% voted to remain. A clear lead of 4%. And it was a massive turnout. Larger, as I say, than any other turnout in British history. The manifestos of the two parties on which they stood for election both undertook to leave the European Union, honouring the people's vote. However, some of the dishonest members of that parliament, those parties, who had corruptly gained their election to parliament based on that promise, set out from the moment they returned to find ways to renege on the promise. However, there was a vote to enact Article 50 of the European treaties, under which we would take 2 years to leave the European Union, a 2-year period that would commence on a set date. And we would negotiate during those terms on the terms of leaving the European Union. This was passed by one of the largest majorities ever held in a disputed vote in the House of Commons. It was massively in favour. That did not deter the duplicitous losers of the people's vote from trying every trick in the book. Having run out of ethical tricks, for lack of a better word, they then decided that they would apply to the Supreme Court when our Prime Minister prorogued Parliament. Now, that may be a word which is rather obscure to many, particularly around the world. Prorogued means call into a non-sitting, non-debated position, Parliament. It is customary in this country, in the autumn, after Parliament has returned to address any urgent business, to prorogue Parliament for between 3 and 4 weeks, to allow for what is known as the party conference season. This gives the politicians and the journalists an opportunity to endeavour to parade their skills before the public on a party political basis. Our Prime Minister this time, because this is one of the longest sessions of Parliament that has been held, I believe for well over 200 years, without a Queen's speech, which is the occasion on which the Parliament lays out the details of its policies, added 5 days to the period of prorogation. Not much problem with that, one would have thought. However, the duplicitous losers set out to make a great issue of it. They decided to take this to the High Court. These were a collection of wealthy, self-interested individuals who, having gone to the High Court, I might add, supported in court by the ex-Prime Minister of Britain, John Major, who himself had prorogued Parliament for 17 days on political grounds to avoid being confronted by the revelations of a cash for questions scandal. Johnson merely tacked on 5 days, which seems pretty darned reasonable to arrange a Queen's speech. John Major had added on 17 days to avoid being exposed as a political party involved in skullduggery and fraud, accepting cash for questions asked in the House of Commons to promote a given commercial point of view. This was taken to the Supreme Court, which is frequently called the highest court in the land. Well, firstly, it isn't supreme, it isn't a real court, and it isn't a British court. The Supreme Court of the United Kingdom is a member of the network of the presidents of the Supreme Judicial Courts of the European Union. 9 out of the 11 justices sitting in this case receive a stipend in excess of 175,000 a year. I guess stipend is a euphemism for bribe, from the European Union, directly from the European Union. Even local councillors in Britain have to declare their pecuniary interests. Would you believe these shysters do not have to declare their pecuniary interest? Just as members of the House of Lords and House of Commons in Britain do not have to declare pensions and stipends from the European Union. Therefore, the European Union is buying votes in our Parliament, our House of Lords, and amongst our civil servants, and now our judiciary. Clearly, one can understand why unelected appointees who have not been scrutinised in any manner by Britain, corruptly funded by the EU, would vote against the interests of democracy and the vote of the British people. The British courts have no role in government in Britain, where the people are sovereign, unlike the EU. Could there be, in fact, a better reason to leave the European Union than they are attempting to stifle what little democracy remains across Europe? I stand firmly in the belief that the decision made of the so-called Supreme Court was ultra vires. However, our government found itself in a position of being forced by this foreign power to obey its instruction. An instruction that was led on by the baying mob of the opposition, who are desperately trying to use any ruse they can to go against the wishes of the British people. Our Prime Minister returned from having delivered a speech at, I believe it was 1:30 British time, to the United Nations in New York, a speech which I had stayed up and listened to, and thought actually, under the circumstances, was excellent. He had the United Nations of all colours and persuasions in fits of laughter, in support of his aims, and he discussed British values that he wished to see grow and be nurtured around the world.
Greg, you mentioned initially that the case went to the High Court, and then you immediately jumped and said it went to the Supreme Court. What happened in the High Court that then caused it to go to the Supreme Court?
We have a strange system of justice, which possibly means explaining it to others. It's the structure that matters here, the differentiation between High Court, etc. The High Court is the Court of England and Wales. This case had been taken by the charlatans who are trying to stop Brexit against the wishes of the people to every court they could find willing to get involved. It was taken to the High Court in Britain, which is the Court for England and Wales, because Scotland and Northern Ireland have their own quasi-independent courts. It was taken to the Court of England and Wales, and they found in favour of the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, and the government that they had lawfully prorogued Parliament, and that it was a political matter and nothing to do with the courts. It was then taken to the Scottish Court, and the Scottish Court came forward with what can only be called a perverse judgment, in that they became involved in the political issues of Parliament. Minded, of course, that in real terms, Parliament itself is a court which is superior to the court structure of the country. And the final Court of Appeal has constitutionally been a court of the House of Lords, not some European construct, namely the Supreme Court. So Scotland found perversely against the government. The case also went to the Belfast Court for Northern Ireland, who in line with the English and Welsh High Court, found in favour of the government and said it was a political matter over which they had no jurisdiction. Hence, I claim, as the Supreme Court, or so-called Supreme Court of the United Kingdom, being a member of the network of the presidents of the Supreme Judicial Courts of the European Union, under which their justices receive 175,000 approximately per annum each, saw fit to effectively enact law, which is of course way beyond the authority of any legal court. It is a matter of whether the law is correctly interpreted that they can judge on, not make new laws to suit their paymasters in Europe. I hope that helps clarify it.
It does, but if as you say, and I'm playing devil's advocate here, but if, as you say, they cannot enact laws, then why has the Prime Minister obeyed it then? Why just not ignore it?
Because until the 31st of October, Britain's Supreme Court is the European Court of Justice, not British justice. Be minded that European law is very alien and very foreign to British justice. It's founded on Roman law with a heavy overlay of Code Napoleon. Roman law states that the citizen has no rights other than the rights granted to them by law. British law is completely the other way around, where the ultimate rights are held by the citizen, and under British law, the citizen has the right to do absolutely everything unless it is specifically prohibited by law, which is, as you can see, the complete opposite of the manner in which European law works. This means that under British law, governance, courts, and civil service are the servants of the people, whereas under European law, effectively, the people are the servants of their masters.
So basically then, Parliament's prorogation has now ended, and therefore they have now met back up. And I understand Johnson gave quite a hearty debate in the House of Commons yesterday. So bring us up to date and perhaps tell us or advise us of your conclusions of where we actually are vis-a-vis the Brexit situation.
Basically, bringing you up to date is a matter of, in many ways, of guesswork, because whether one accepts what was a very measured debate on the part of Johnson and his supporters in Parliament, strong and at times strident, but measured and accurate, and not utilizing emotive and emotional input, unlike the opposition. Johnson has undertaken that he will obey the letter of the law. He, as it stands, that does not preclude him from appealing it, because it is always possible to appeal law. He will carry out the law as it has been made. He will, like any individual, utilize the best legal advice he can obtain to stay within the law, which is what he did. It is completely dishonest to say that he broke the law in proroguing Parliament in the manner he did, although this is the implication of the scoundrels in opposition who are trying to act against the wishes of the British people. You cannot break law if that law did not exist at the time that the Supreme Court saw fit to write into law as part of our Constitution. Their own opinion was, as I've already said, in my opinion, ultra vires, and to have backdated it compounds that error. Therefore, he conducted the debate. I give him full marks. He has left the United Nations shortly after his speech, which must have been at about 2:30 in the morning, our time. He had driven, I was going to say rush to the airport, but it's impossible to rush anywhere in New York in a car. He had been driven to the airport where he caught the red eye back to Britain, and he had arrived back in Britain after lunch. He'd landed, he went to Downing Street, and he appeared in Parliament in the late afternoon, early evening, at about 6 o'clock, as I recall. I listened to the entirety of the debate from 11:30 in the morning, right the way through. He delivered a bravura performance, and in his statement, he made it very clear that although he would obey the wishes of this kangaroo court, he would seek to find any loophole that could be found, and that it was his intention to honour the undertaking made by Parliament to leave the European Union on the 31st of October. He referred to the surrender bill that have been introduced and passed by Parliament by those seeking to act against the interests of the British people, or more to the point, against the wishes of the British people as voted on. There was much furore at the fact that he referred to it as the surrender bill, but a bill that leaves you in a position of going to negotiate, but removes your primary negotiating tool, can only be seen as a surrender, because it hands all of the authority to the people you are trying to negotiate with.
This is the bill that prevents him from having a hard Brexit, isn't it?
It is indeed.
Yes.
When after on 2 years of our Parliament saying again and again and again, I think it was somewhere in the region of 160 times on the floor of the House of Commons, that no deal is better than a bad deal, which had not been argued with by the opposition for a very long time, until they found it was a place they could put a lever in to try to create mayhem and give a very, very good display of why they are realistically unfit for office, any office, in that they are dishonoring everything. And bear in mind that the leading party in the opposition, the Labour Party, they have a faction who believes that we should leave, a faction who believe that we shouldn't leave, and even their leader is sitting on the fence, not prepared to say whether he thinks we should leave or we should stay. The whole situation on the part of the opposition is a disgraceful mess. Also bear in mind that a collection, primarily of opposition women, saw fit to try and make an issue of calling surrender, surrender, and pointing out the fact that betrayal of the British people who a promise had been made to was betrayal, tried to promote this as pejorative language and almost high treason by our Prime Minister to use such language. Yet I well recall the community charge in Britain being described at every opportunity by the opposition as the poll tax. They seem to have one rule for themselves and another rule for others. Finally, in very emotive and emotional language, left with absolutely no sound and genuine ground, the opposition resorted to invoking the unfortunate murdered Joe Cox, who was an MP who was killed in the street by a deranged member of her constituency. There is no connection. Yes, it is true that many threats and many instances of foul language and abuse occur on social media. Why it's called social media, I'm not quite sure. I think much of it is absolutely anti-social. But there you go. Most people who have an opinion, voice an opinion, or represent an opinion will find themselves accused of all sorts.
So going back then now to Boris Johnson's options, Greg, what are they? And what is going to happen on the 31st of October?
Johnson's position at the moment is difficult in that he has undertaken that he will obey the law as it currently appears to stand. However, there is every reason to believe he is investigating, as are the Remainers, any loophole they can find in that law. He has undertaken that he will obtain the best possible deal he can, despite having both hands tied behind his back by the Surrender Act. And he has undertaken that we will leave the European Union on the 31st of October. I think he is accurate in his statement. I incline to believe him. And the 31st of October, I believe he will have an agreement in some form that will be acceptable to leave the European Union. He has not said he will leave without a deal, but perhaps the Remainers would be well-minded to recall the fact that some 160 plus countries around the world deal with the European Union with what they call a no deal. It is not a no deal. It is a World Trade Organization agreement deal. So even if we do not negotiate a bespoke deal, we can leave with a deal on the 31st of October. And I believe that is the loophole he is aiming for if we fail to put in place the bespoke elements required.
Greg, that's terrific. Thank you very much. I have no doubt we shall return to this topic in the weeks ahead.
It's only 34 days.
Within the next 5 weeks ahead. Greg, thank you very much.
Thank you indeed, Richard.
We hope you have found this video interesting and informative, and if so, please give it a thumbs up and share it on social media. Please ensure that you have subscribed to our channel and press the bell sign so that you are notified of any future videos. Also, kindly visit our website at illuminatisilver.com, and if you haven't already done so, please subscribe either as a free or paying member for regular email updates and offers. Disclaimer: Illuminati Silver owners come from a background of banking, international wealth management and economics. Having now retired from these worlds, we are not qualified to give investment advice. Therefore, this and other productions must not be deemed to be giving such advice and merely represent the personal views of its owners. Glory, glory.